But this was wartime, and all the available copper was being used to make bullets and shells. Grove's men hit on a drastic alternative.
Someone had the bright idea, said, why not use silver? Well, that's a very good conductor, but where were you going to get it? Well, you could go to the Treasury of the United States and decide to get what eventually were 14,000 tons of silver that were literally taken out of the depository and melted down and turned into the wiring for the magnets at Y12.
Once Groves had borrowed the Treasury silver, the machinery, known as calutrons, could be built. We can now reveal how this equipment worked. Uranium would be heated and fed out into the enormously powerful magnetic field. This force would be enough to separate tiny amounts of weapons-grade uranium-235 from the original raw material. 38 magnets make up one set of calutrons, and there are 36 calutrons in this building. In total, there were 1,152 calutrons on the site.
The magnets were so large that they had to keep people away from them, and they couldn't use any tools that might be attracted by the magnets. In fact, they put a red line to warn people not to go any closer. If you did, and you happened to have something in your pocket that was metal like a pocket knife, it'd suck it right up against there, and it would hold you there. You couldn't get it off. And in fact, to get it off, you'd have to cut the material around the object to get away.
Evidence shows that the power consumed was so vast that for the duration of its wartime mission, Project X would use 1/7 of all electricity generated in the United States. 1,152 machines ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a whole year. These machines were operated not by scientists, but by female high school graduates. They were called the Calutron Girls, and they had little idea of what they were involved in.
We knew we were doing something towards the war effort, but it was a surprise. And we were glad that we could contribute to that. You had dials that you had to get, maybe this dial lower and this dial higher.
The units that they were monitoring, they actually sat in front and would turn these knobs as needed. They were actually rheostats that would change the current going to the magnets and the calutrons. But they didn't know that. All they knew was this meter needs to stay on a certain number, and I adjust this one or I adjust this one to make it move one way or the other. They had no idea what they were actually doing.
Nothing was ever said. If you talked about anything, it's, what did you do last night? Where did you go? But not about work. So all the girls was young, pretty, and very sociable. And we enjoyed each other.
Ray has learned that the scientists still weren't convinced these young high school girls were capable of doing this crucial job.
So they set up a contest where the scientists operated one bay of controls for the calutrons, and the calutron girls operated another one. They ran for a week like that, and at the end of the week, the calutron girls beat the scientists hands down.
2,000 Calutron girls worked in shifts for 6 months, but the process proved so inefficient that only 7 pounds of uranium-235 were produced. Time was running out. No matter how innovative the engineering, to have any hope of meeting the target, a second plant would now have to be brought online at Project X. And this would require the construction of the biggest building in the world. This crumbling edifice was once the biggest building in the world. Called K25, it was a key building in the Manhattan Project, and it was designed to increase production of the desperately needed uranium-235. Today, K25 is inaccessible. It's highly contaminated. But our experts will discover what this building looked like and find the clues to the community that worked to build it. 1943. American forces are engaged in a vicious battle with the Japanese for control of the Pacific. The need to develop the atomic bomb is as great as ever. If they are going to produce the 100 pounds needed to build the bomb, scientists need to find new ways to obtain the precious U-235. The solution was a new type of enrichment plant. If building the town at Oak Ridge and the vast electromagnetic separation plant had sapped resources, this new phase was to present the greatest challenge so far.
They authorized the construction of a gaseous diffusion plant. It was a much more difficult engineering problem. It really was a bigger gamble as far as General Groves and his people are concerned.
To get the job done, they would have to construct the biggest building in the world. They chose a site 11 miles from the secret city of Oak Ridge. The first pour of concrete alone would cover 200,000 cubic yards. Entire companies were requisitioned to provide the thousands of tons of materials needed. Thousands of construction workers were required. Historian David Bradshaw is convinced that they were housed near the site, but nothing today survives of this enormous settlement.
The Army, right across the highway, built an entire community, temporary in nature, nicknamed Happy Valley by its residents. But it wasn't so temporary that it didn't have things like a school. It had theaters, a recreation hall, stores. Essentially, when the war ended, the Army tore down the entire community. Some of the structures were built on foundations and footers, which we think may still exist. So we're going to see what we can find and see if we can find some clues to the community called Happy Valley.
Happy Valley was built in 1943, and David calculates that it housed 15,000 people. It consisted of row upon row of trailers. Despite the fact that the site is now overgrown by woodland, clues to what this town once looked like are everywhere.
I think right through here is a fire hydrant in the middle of the woods. Of course, it wouldn't be in the middle of the woods 60 years ago. It would have been in the middle of this bustling city, which is called Happy Valley. And really everywhere you look, even though this is just the woods today, you see bits and pieces of the thousands of people who lived here.
The ground is still flattened where the roads used to run. There are remains of sewage channels and water tunnels across the site.
I think this is a telephone pole. It looks like it probably powered a facility, and I think this foundation was probably it. Looks like a definitely a permanent structure. This is part of a lavatory, I'm sure, a toilet. And it probably would have sat just like that over this. And it looks like over here there is what's probably, I imagine, was the sink. So this was probably a men's lavatory for the Hutman area.
Using evidence from the site, as well as original plans, David's been able to bring back to life the temporary settlement of Happy Valley. For 24 months between 1943 and 1944, this was a thriving town. Inhabitants were housed in trailers and endured difficult conditions while they were constructing the K-25 facility. This is the building that they were working to complete. It may be a ruin today, but exploring the site reveals clues to K-25's top-secret past. At a cost of $512 million, $10 billion today, it's the size of 35 football fields, built just to produce 100 pounds of processed uranium.
It's an absolutely fantastic structure. The building itself is 4 stories high on this side, the outside. And rather than building a mile-long building, they folded it into a U shape. And what you're looking at is one leg of this U. This is a half-mile long. Each of the legs is 400 feet wide.
The reason that K-25 had to be so enormous was that the processes going on inside were so complex. Gaseous diffusion works by filtering the uranium-238 in gas form to produce the weapons-grade uranium-235. It's so inefficient, the process has to be repeated many thousands of times. But such was the desperate need to enrich uranium to fuel a bomb that no obstacle was too big.
It was, and still is, the largest building that was built in the Manhattan Project days. It's the largest relic that remains. And it is just now, as we speak, in the process of being taken down.
Today, K-25 is strictly off-limits, but using original plans and eyewitness testimony, we can reveal what this building would have looked like when it was completed in 1944. Documents show that it occupied 2 million square feet. It was a half-mile long by 1,000 feet wide. It housed 758 miles of copper tubing, 3,800 miles of electrical conductors, and the amount of water used in its processes would have supplied a city of 5 million. When K-25 began operations, it's recorded that it took a team of 12,000 just to hunt for leaks in the piping, which had to be completely airtight.
Well, my job was to find the leaks in the wells in the pipe. And the pipes would come in from overhead and stop at my station. We found the leak in the pipe and we marked it. And then the millwrights would come and take the pipe off to be welded and sent back. And that was just all day. We just wondered what the pipes. They were big pipes, little pipes with elbows, all kinds of pipes.
And of course, security was as tight as ever.
This is my badge that I used when I worked at K-25. I could go to the restroom, I could go to the cafeteria, and I could go to my workstation, but no place else.
After a supreme effort, K-25 began producing the desperately needed enriched uranium, which would enable Project X to meet its target in the race to build the bomb. In July 1944, an armed guard took the first sample of uranium on a 2,000-mile journey from Oak Ridge to New Mexico, where some of the greatest scientists the world has ever known were waiting to work on it. It would be in the buildings of another secret city that the bomb would be armed, tested, and built. That place remains highly classified even today. It is the laboratory at Los Alamos. Deep in the heart of New Mexico is the most important site of the Manhattan Project, Los Alamos. This is still a top-secret facility for the design of nuclear weapons. But in the 1940s, it was known simply as Project Y. This was the site where the bombs that ended World War II were designed and built. Very little remains of the original Manhattan Project buildings. But our team of experts will search historic documents and crumbling ruins for clues to reveal how this place looked. Archaeologist John Isaacson has studied the Los Alamos site to understand why Groves and his scientific director, J. Robert Oppenheimer, chose this location.
We're at the site of the original main gate to the laboratory that was established in 1943. They were looking for a place that was remote, and in those days this was very remote, and that also did not have any security vulnerabilities because of the terrain. It provided the best suite of characteristics that they were looking for to put a laboratory here.
When Groves and Oppenheimer came here for the first time, this site was home to the elite ranch school. The boys were rushed through their graduation, the land was requisitioned, and the engineers moved in. The main school hall, Fuller Lodge, remains standing today.
And this really became sort of the social center